We continue our reading of Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus, an invitation to spend a year with your best friend, a daily devotional by author George R. Knight. Today's reading, January 10, Parting Thoughts on the Divine Christ. He, Jesus Christ, is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Colossians 1:17. Our passage for today makes two astounding claims about Jesus. The first is that he existed before all things. He existed as far back in time as we can possibly imagine. There was never a time in which he did not exist. His existence is coexistence with that of the Father and the Spirit. Jesus may have lived only 33 years as a human being, but that short period is hardly a blip on the timeline of his eternal being. The second claim is equally amazing. Jesus not only existed before all things, but in him all things hold together. We must read that thought in the context of the previous verse, which states that in him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. Colossians 1:16. Note the forceful alls in verse 16 and 17. 1. In him all things were created. 2. Jesus existed before all things. 3. All things were created through him and for him. 4. In him all things hold together. The implication of that fourth point is that Christ is not merely the creator of all that exists, but also its sustainer. Not only did he bring everything into being, but he maintains it each moment. Paul couldn't have painted a picture of the divine Christ in more forceful words. But, some might be asking, what about verse 15, which distinctly and clearly claims that Christ is the firstborn of all creation? That is an excellent question, especially since many throughout Christian history have used that verse in an attempt to demonstrate that Christ was a created being and not fully divine, thereby undercutting the doctrine of the Trinity. Here, we need to examine the biblical concept of firstborn. While it can refer to line of birth, that is obviously not its meaning in the context of verse 17, John 1:1, and many other passages speaking to the divinity of Christ. Rather, firstborn throughout the Bible means first in rank. We see it illustrated repeatedly by the dignity and office held by the firstborn in both regular and royal families. Thus, it is that Paul is claiming for Christ the highest position. He then goes on to illustrate that primacy in Colossians 1:16 and 17. This concludes our reading today of Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus.